How has the perception on the icons of Dutch nationalism changed over the years? Icons that were constructed in the 19th century and that still dominate the public space. The national history that was being constructed focused on the glory days of the revolt against the Spanish crown, the colonial expansion, and the golden age of painting and poetry. Culture was being cultivated in the public sphere. Monuments and statues were raised. National museums, such as the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, were established, and public buildings and housing were constructed. An exemplary figure of the Golden Age was Johannes Pieterszoon Coen. Not just a local hero, he was branded in the Dutch public space at the end of the 19th up to the first half of the 20th century. He was given a prominent feature in Batavia, Indonesia in 1876 and in 1893 in Hoorn, where his statue was raised. His figure is most dominantly present in the city of Hoorn, which refers to itself as Coen City. Hoorn is located in the northern province of Holland at the shores of the former Zuiderzee, an inland sea that used to be part of the North Sea. It became a major harbour town during the Dutch Golden Age and was one of the constituent members of the VOC, United East India Company. This company was founded in 1603 in order to gain a monopoly on trade in the East Indies. It did so very successfully, gaining monopolies on the trade of valuable spices like nutmeg, cloves, pepper, and cinnamon, later added by cacao, tobacco, coffee, tea, opium, and slaves. Coen, born not in Hoorn but in a small town nearby, was educated in Italy as an accountant and joined the VOC. He was appointed Governor-General twice, from 1617 to 1623 and from 1627 to 1629. He became a dominant force in the Dutch Indies, accountant by training, but also a ruthless military leader who was largely responsible for the Dutch monopoly of the spice trade. Coen also made it clear that this trade needed to be based on a military force, declaring that we cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade. After Coen discovered that the inhabitants of Banda had been selling the spices to the English, despite contracts with the VOC, which obliged them to sell only to the VOC at low prices, he carried out a preconceived plan which amounted to an ethnic cleansing of the Banda Islands. He led an armed assault of Banda, whereby thousands of inhabitants were massacred. Of the 15,000 inhabitants, it is believed only about 1,000 survived on the island. 800 people were deported to Batavia. This can be considered one of the most dark pages of the history of the VOC. Many inhabitants, men, women, and children were killed, villages destroyed. Hundreds of Bandanese were brought to Batavia as slaves. Bandanese who were suspected of betrayal were beheaded, their heads stuck on a pole. Already by his contemporaries, Coen was criticized for his harsh policies. Members of the VOC and Laurens Real, a former governor-general, stated, "By killing and torturing the population, we will be infamously known to the world as the most cruel nation in the world." After the bankruptcy of the VOC in 1799, the colonies were nationalized and came under the administration of the Dutch government. During the time of the colonial imperialism, up to the independence of Indonesia in 1949, the Dutch endeavored in expanding their territories by using military force and engaging in various wars. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Dutch achieved its largest hegemony and the colonies were of vital importance, bringing huge profits to the Netherlands. Between the year 1830 and 1870, an average of about 25% of the Dutch government budget came from the profits made in the Dutch Indies. It was in this context of Dutch imperialism that the statue in Hoorn was conceived. Besides the construction of Dutch nation building, it was this political imperial context which was important in the reappearance of Coen. He was believed to serve as an example and forerunner of the colonial policies. Besides, the Major of Hoorn himself earned a profit in the Indies with the trade in opium. At that time, various historians had already criticized Coen's ruthless handlings by referring to the mass slaughtering. One of them, J.A. van der Gijs, reacted on the statue that was raised in 1876 in Batavia. If not for the fact that a statue has already been raised, I doubt if it would. His hands are stained with blood. Other writers and journalists also raised their voices, criticizing the prevalence of economical benefits over moral conduct. A teacher from Hoorn came up with the idea to celebrate Coen's 300 years birthday. Also the Westfries Museum, that was only recently founded at that time, dedicated a commemorative exhibition. The importance of the colonial imperium for the Netherlands, as well as the iconical function of Coen as a powerful example of successful overseas trade, was also depicted in the architecture of the early 20th century in Amsterdam. These were buildings designed to house public enterprises directly related to finance and trade. For example, the Stock Exchange Beurs van Berlage and the Royal Tropical Institute, the Tropen Institute, did not fail to place Coen at a prominent position. Resistance to Coen's prominent figure in public space and national narrative has not ceased since then. Each time Coen is commemorated, voices of disapproval are heard. In 2011, the journalist Erik van den Berg, resident of Hoorn, initiated a citizens' initiative arguing that Coen was associated with the genocide on the Banda Islands.
I'm not from Hoorn. Before I moved to Hoorn, I lived in Amsterdam. When somebody informed me about Coen and the things he did in Indonesia, I was completely flabbergasted. I couldn't understand why this statue was standing here in a public location in honor of a perpetrator of genocide. I thought, this can't be true. And then I started reading about Coen and I found it is true. The man kept a diary, didn't make a secret of what he did on Banda. He writes almost all people from Banda had died. Only few of them managed to escape. To me, all statues of historical persons in public space have been put there in honor of these persons. Some people see this differently. They tell me, yes, in the 19th century this statue was erected in honor of Coen, but nowadays we see things differently. It's no longer standing there in honor of Coen. And so I ask these people, if this statue has lost its original function, why do you want to keep it there? Why not move it to the museum? The answer I get is, we have grown accustomed to the statue. It has always been there. And for generations it has been an inseparable part of the historic main square. I relate to these arguments. I understand the feelings. But on the other hand, to many others, this statue still is a statue of honor. Many people have told me it is thanks to men like Coen the Netherlands has become a wealthy and mighty nation. He did what he had to do. If Coen hadn't turned the East Indies into a colony, other European nations would have done the same. Somebody wrote, I wish we still had ruthless men like Coen. They wouldn't hesitate to put the Netherlands on the map again. In the Coen's statue, Burgerinitiatief, we asked the city council to remove the statue or to add a new text to the pedestal of the statue, reflecting current opinion on Coen. In my personal opinion, the statue should be removed to the local museum. Others participating in the citizens' initiative preferred a new text on the pedestal. The city council did what I expected they would do. They had to do something, but I knew for sure they would never remove the statue. The main thing I was disappointed about is that in the new text the council didn't mention Coen committed genocide. that just mentioned thousands of Bendenese were killed. In a radio interview, City Councillor Peter Westenberg simply denied Coen committed genocide as a reason for not describing Coen's deeds on Benda as genocide. He didn't explain why it wasn't genocide, but I'm sure he couldn't. Before making a decision about the text, I had sent him a declaration of 9 historians, all experts on the subject, including Jonathan Israel, all stating that Coen had depopulated the Banda Islands and therefore committed genocide. Well, a statue is no history book, but in a way, yes, the statue tells a story, in particular about the way people have felt about G.P. Coen since the statue was erected. In Hoorn, some people were happy. Finally, the statue was issue of political discussion. There had been many protests against the statue, but before the citizens' initiative, the city council had never reacted. Others weren't so happy. I received anonymous death threats. I was verbally attacked. Things were thrown to the front window of my house. Pamphlets were being spread in the city depicting me as a Nazi collaborator. And also, someone started a petition. The statue of Coen shouldn't be removed. This was a national petition, not a local petition.
A historian from Hoorn, who had been protesting for years against the statue and who supported this initiative, stated, "But don't we decide from the spirit of our days about such matters? We speak very differently now about races, mass murder, crimes against humanity, exploitation of colonies and slavery. How can a country that charges someone like Mladic before an international tribunal accept a tribute to Coen? For how many deaths was Mladic responsible, and for how many Coen?" The final decision made by the city council was to keep the statue in place and to replace the text. As ironic fate would have it, the statue was accidentally knocked off its pedestal a few weeks later by a local contractor working in the square after the summer fair. The local authority had the statue quickly repaired and replaced again. A proposal for a text in Bahasa Indonesian as a gesture of respect, compassion and apology was not adopted. The executive responsible explicitly stated that he wanted to avoid formulating a moral judgment on Coen. In focusing their attention on forgotten episodes and shameful moments, historians can help to create a more honest and complex self-image of the nation. Criteria are emerging for a critical evaluation of national narratives and political memory. It can be put to the test whether they adhere to exclusive norms or whether they include awkward facts and recognize the voices and experiences of minorities. In the case of Coen, historians, over time, have repeatedly served as a counter-memory to the exclusive representation of Coen. Citizens and journalists also have provided a counter-narrative and memory, expressing their disagreement with the national narrative. However, the City Council and Museum avoided to really engage in a critical debate around the meaning and values the statue of Coen represents. Cultivation of culture is still institutionalized, top-down.